begin lesson 4.3, and we're going to talk about sampling techniques. So these are techniques that we use when we choose a sample out of a population. So I want to begin with just a real quick definition for what a sample is so that we're sure that we're all on the same page. All right, so suppose that I was trying to determine the average age of college students. Okay, so I need to know average age of college students. So you think about how you would do that. What I would not want to do is go to every college student in the United States and ask them how old they were. So why wouldn't that work? Why wouldn't I want to go to every college student in the United States and ask them how old they were? Well, that would be an incredibly large group of people. So first of all, I don't want to have to ask every person in the United States how old they are. That's too many people. It's going to take me too long. And then secondly, once I get that data, if that was even possible, I would have such a huge data set that it's not really practical to work with that many people. Okay? So instead of asking every college student how old they are, we would ask a small group. And so this small group would be called a sample. And so the idea is that it is easier to work with a small group than it is to work with the huge group of all college students. All right, so what we're talking about in this section is when we decide who's going to be in our small group, we want to do it as fairly as possible. So we want to use one of these 4 techniques that are covered in this section to avoid having any bias. All right, so what does this word mean? What does it mean, bias? Bias means that you have prejudice in favor or against something. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of jot this down. Prejudice either for or against somebody. So when I select the people to be in my sample, I want to be sure that I don't have any bias. I don't want any prejudice. I don't want to lean more towards selecting one person rather than another. I want to be sure that I'm being fair. And so these 4 sampling techniques that we're covering in this section are designed to prevent that prejudice or that bias from coming into play. All right, so the first sampling technique is called a random sample. This is the one that you're probably most familiar with. Okay, we hear a lot about a random sample. Oftentimes, we don't really understand exactly how that sample comes to be, though. So a random sample means that every person in your population, so when we're talking about population, we mean every college student in the United States, or every man in the United States, or every woman in the United States, or every child in the whole world. We're talking about these huge groups of people. All right, so these are our big groups. These are the groups that are too big to work with. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that big group and we're going to give everybody in that big group a number, okay? And then the key for a random sample is that you're going to have a computer, or you're going to have a calculator, or maybe you're going to have a box filled with numbers, but you're going to have something that is going to generate some random numbers. All right, so I might go through and give everybody in my population a number, and then I might get the computer to generate a list of 5 random numbers, and maybe the computer shoots out the numbers, we'll keep them small, 5, 25, 13, 47, and 91. And then I would go back to my big group, my population, and I would say, okay, who has these numbers? Who's number 5? Who's number 25? And those people would be a part of our sample. Okay, so the key with a random sample is that the computer does the selection. Okay, and again, it can be a calculator, it could be a box with some pieces of paper with different numbers in it, but not you. You are not the one that is making the selection as to who is going to be in the sample. Okay, we also have a systematic sample, and this starts out the same way. Every person in the population, okay, so every person in our big group, again, this is the group that's too big to work with, every person in our big group is assigned a number, and then we choose every kth person. So what this means is we're choosing a multiple. So we might come in and we might say, we want to pick every 5th person. Okay, or we might pick every 100th person, all right, or every 30th person. Okay, you want some multiple. I'm just going to put etc. right here. All right, you want some multiple happening so that you are very systematically going through your big group and picking people, every 5th person, every 100th person, every 1000th person, whatever the case may be. If you have that multiple, then you have a systematic sample. All right, number 3, stratified sample. Okay, so this one and the last one are very similar in that they both divide the population into groups, okay, according to some characteristics. So if you look at the picture on the screen, it looks like we have 2 groups of people. The top group is the males, the boys, and the second group is the females or the girls. Okay, so we've divided our population. We've divided our big group into 2 smaller groups based on their gender. All right, and then to do a stratified sample, we're going to choose the same number from each group. All right, so I might come in. Now, you would want to do this either using a random or a systematic sample, but I would want to come in and I might say, okay, I want to choose maybe 3 people from each group. So I would come in and randomly, like with the computer or systematically with the multiples, I might come in and say, okay, I'm going to pick these 3 people here, and then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to pick the same number of people out of that group. Okay, so the key is the population is divided into groups, and then the same number is picked from each group. All right, our last type is called a cluster sample. A cluster sample starts out the same way in that you're going to take your population, take your big group, you're going to divide it into smaller groups according to some characteristic. So it looks like this big group of people was divided into groups according to their color of their shirt. So we've got the orange group and the blue and the purple and the red and the green. And then what we're going to do is we're going to choose 2 or more whole groups. Now I've seen it where you just choose 1 group, but usually it's 2 or more. And you're going to survey everyone in those groups. So I might come down here and say, okay, I'm going to take everybody in the purple group and everybody in the orange group. Okay, and those people will be a part of my sample. All right, so that's a quick overview of the 4 sampling techniques. Now, the last thing I'm going to do with you is I'm going to put an example up, and we just want to go through and make sure that we can identify the types of techniques that are being used. Okay, all right, so the first one says, in a large school district, all teachers from 2 buildings are interviewed to determine whether they believe the students have less homework to do now than in previous years. So I'm going to look at this part right here where it says all teachers from 2 buildings. Okay, and so the buildings are the clusters. Okay, the buildings are the groups, and we're picking everybody from 2 buildings. So this makes this a cluster sampling technique. Okay, all right, number 40 is similar. It says all fast food workers at a randomly selected fast food restaurant. Okay, so the restaurants are the groups. We've got a group of workers who work at McDonald's. We have a group of workers who work at Burger King. We have a group of workers who work at Wendy's. And we're going to go in and we're going to pick one of those restaurants and we're going to survey everybody there. And so again, that makes that a cluster. We've got the groups and we're picking an entire group. All right, number 41. A group of unmarried men are selected using random numbers. So hopefully this one seems easy. If we're using random numbers, those are generated by a computer or a calculator. That's an example of a random sample. The next one, every 100th hamburger. So there's our multiple. So remember that any indication of a multiple would be systematic. All right, and our last one, mail carriers of a large city are divided into 4 groups. Okay, so if it's groups, I know that it's either stratified or it's cluster. And then it says 10 are selected from each group. So remember that if you're picking the same number from each group, that's a stratified sample.